Welcome back to another edition of Down to the Wire with my analyst, Nolan Thode. Nolan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. The new quadmester has started, so a little bit of optimism in the air. I got the spare though, you and I both, so I'm gonna be enjoying that. So enjoying my time off, I guess.
I think we both are enjoying our time off right now. With the spare, like you mentioned, it's definitely a nice reliever from the regular two course for 10 weeks. Now we only have one course for 10 weeks.
No, yeah, exactly.
Getting right into it, I believe that the Sabres fans and their whole team is basically pissed at the New Jersey Devils because the Devils apparently lied to the NHL about their COVID testing results. I'm not too sure about that there, but they don't like how the Devils basically got away with it over the past weekend there, both on Saturday and Sunday. Because as we mentioned that the Devils had 17 players on their COVID list. The Sabres announced today that Rasmus Dahlin has become the 9th Buffalo Sabre to join that list. And it's just crazy, this fallout from this past weekend.
Yeah, I think it shows really how complicated running a sports league is during this time. It's not just keeping track of one team; it's keeping track of all 31 and how they interact with each other. Similar situation in the NFL. I remember early in the season, Buffalo fans, Sabres, Bills this time, they were mad at Tennessee because the Titans, they were a little bit disruptive in terms of their protocol and breaking and such, and fans thought that they should be penalized.
Going more in depth into this, Ralph Krueger even tested positive, and he is 61 years old. And this isn't good news for him personally or for the Sabres. And, I'm just hoping he has a speedy recovery and this doesn't hospitalize him.
Yeah, of course, you're wishing the best health-wise for him, but, even you look at how it's going to shape their team. Their head coach, they're sort of starting to build their sort of identity with this team this season. And, good coaching and having a good head coach is a big part of that. So, if he's sidelined and they have to play without him, it could definitely impact the way that they play.
I think it also could impact the development of some players, of some of their younger players, such as Dylan Cousins, who is unfortunately on the COVID list. But he was getting used to Ralph Krueger's tactics and playing style, playing underneath him, and now the Sabres might have to use an interim head coach, which could shake up the whole locker room.
Yeah, no, like you bring up the example with Dylan Cousins, like. You look at Eric Stahl, it's probably not going to impact him too much, whoever's coaching the game. He's more of a veteran guy, but, Cousins coming in, all he knows is Ralph Krueger's system. So, definitely it's a shakeup and could be hurting the Buffalo Sabres.
Who do you think would be at fault for this? Do you think it would be the NHL for allowing the games to be played both on Saturday and Sunday? Or do you think it would be partially the New Jersey Devils for not giving enough information?
I think obviously the finger is to point at the New Jersey Devils just in terms of, the ripple effect that they've had on the league. But, overall you can point at the NHL and say that they're not handling this as well as, they could be. Obviously, they're setting out these protocols and hoping that the teams are, following them. And I thought maybe they set the record straight, giving, the Washington 4 earlier in the season, 4-game suspension. They sort of, gave the NHL, a wake-up call. This is what's going to happen. However, recently, now that, it's not just 4 players, it's whole teams, the NHL is starting to, lose hold of their organization.
Another question that needs to be answered, and this is for Ottawa Senators fans, is Matt Murray the answer in goal? He currently has 9 games played. He has a 2-5-1 record with a 410 goals against average and an 875 save percentage. And he hasn't been playing his back-to-back Pittsburgh Penguins seasons as of late, and I think they have to move on from him. They're starting to get questions in goal, and it's crazy just how that season's unfolding.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate for Matt Murray. He was so used to playing behind these incredible Penguins teams. In the playoffs, you could say that he was carried to the finals, to the cup, where he was a part of, the carrying. And I think, you look at him, he has that playoff experience. He has proven to be good in the playoffs. So the Senators, were excited bringing him in. However, even though the Penguins didn't have the greatest of blue lines, this Ottawa blue line is not really doing many favors for Matt Murray, and he's getting hung out to dry on most of these games. And it's not like they have, a real solid backup that they can throw in. Matt Murray's getting beaten on all these goals, and he has to stay in the game just because it's giving them the best chance. So it is unfortunate for the Senators, I'd say.
That contract he signed in the offseason is $6.25 for the next 4 seasons, and currently it's not off to a good start.
Yeah, I didn't like that contract when it was signed. I just thought it was maybe a little bit too much for Matt Murray. There's probably better options you can get in the league at, maybe a cheaper value. However, I do think, having 2 Stanley Cup rings and being a big part of those Penguins teams, was a big attraction for the Senators when they did bring him over. And that's what it cost for them to, sign him to a deal. And they got long-term, and maybe by the end of the contract, when the Senators team is a little more ready to compete, it could be better for him. But as of now, I do think that is a little bit of an overpayment for Matt Murray.
Moving on, we're going to go kind of, talk about the postponements that have been happening around the NHL because, currently we are facing the worst of the worst when talking about how the coronavirus has affected the NHL. Currently, 3 teams have had to postpone their games: the Minnesota Wild, the Buffalo Sabres, and the New Jersey Devils. And, I think that some message has to be sent. More than just fining, more than just suspending. And, the NHL has tried to, I guess, limit the risk for coronavirus because of removing the pane of glass behind the bench and behind the penalty box, which is definitely an odd way of doing it. But if they think that will increase airflow and transmission, then that's good for them. But this season's definitely off to a shaky start, and as we saw with the NFL, they dealt with multiple postponements. So hopefully we get to the end of this season.
Yeah, no, for sure. I bring it to the example of the MLB more so when right at the start of the season, the Miami Marlins, we were new to, running a sports league during this time. And when we heard that, the Miami Marlins had upwards of 15 people on their team in protocols, it was scary, for fans wondering. I personally thought that the MLB, there was a chance the season wasn't even going to end. Short term, it does suck having to reschedule these games. However, I think it's more of an impact long term. All these postponements, it's going to come back to bite you. You're running a tight 56 game schedule, and now with these games having to be moved to later dates, it's frustrating for the league and the schedule makers having to make up for all this time.
I believe, with the coronavirus, how it's affecting, these are American teams as well that we're mentioning. It hasn't even touched the Canadian division at all. The Canadian division has been playing 100% of their games. And I believe that the Canadian division could finish on time.
Yeah, no, we haven't seen any cases of anything so far in the Canadian division. And I'm not sure if that's, there's more discipline within that division, or, just because the cases are lower in Canada. However, what the Canadian division has done so far, that's what I expected from most of the league. I was not expecting the NHL, this sort of league that I'm proud to call myself a fan of. I did not think that they were going to be having this many issues.
One theoretical idea that my dad told me is, he said that with the playoffs the way they are, you play your first 2 rounds within your division. Then after that, the locations are to be determined, whether, it has to be cross-border, but whether it's to be played in Canada or the States is to be determined. But if, let's say they choose USA for this theoretical question or idea here, if the Canadian division finishes their 2 rounds and the American side is still finishing the regular season, the Canadian team or teams can travel to the States and finish their quarantine right in time for, to be able to practice again, right? They don't have any waiting around to do, and vice versa.
Yeah, I think the timing could eventually, prove to be convenient if the Canadian division is 2 weeks ahead of schedule of the US division. However, I think, what's first and foremost on the mind of, the schedule makers and the NHL is they want everything to go, sort of linear and together, all these divisions playing the same amount of games together. But right now, you look in the schedule, some teams have played, almost 15 games. Some teams haven't even played 10. So it is frustrating. And, late in the season, hopefully things are maybe a lot more balanced than they are now. But right now, there's a big difference and imbalance in how many games teams have played.
One gesture that I saw throughout this week or this past week that I really liked was Paul Maurice coming to the defense of his captain, Blake Wheeler. If you guys didn't catch it, the media was criticizing Blake Wheeler for his play in the D zone and just how sloppy it was. But during Paul Maurice's press conference that day, he went on a tirade of bashing the media for their analytics and of how they broke down Blake Wheeler's defensive play. And he said that it was a sloppy back check for another teammate. He mentioned that Wheeler has 11 points in 10 games, or he's over point per game to this point. And I thought that was really nice for the coach to have his captains back to say, like, we're a part of this team. We're in this together. You're a part of my family, essentially.
Yeah, you always love to see when coaches, stick up for their players. And in this case, it was the captain. So obviously, Paul Maurice holds Blake Wheeler to a high standard, being the captain of his team. I just think, with Blake Wheeler, a lot of fans might be overreacting, but his play maybe is what we can expect from him. He's aging, he's not getting any younger. And, maybe the two-way part of his game is not going to be there as much as it used to. He's a lot slower than he used to be. However, he's still a very gifted offensive player. And like Maurice said, with his point production, he's still doing, Blake Wheeler things. It's just maybe it's less of a complete game.
Doug Armstrong has been named the GM for Team Canada as they prepare to hopefully have NHL players on their roster for the 2022 Olympics. And I'm hoping that they have NHL players on the roster because as we saw in 2018, Canada's roster was bare bones. The Americans' roster was bare bones, and Russia and Germany got help from the European leagues. And the first point I'm going to bring to the table is marketing the game. I want to bring this to the table because if you're the NHL and Gary Bettman and you're trying to increase the game as much as possible, you absolutely have to get NHL players into the Olympics. It's paramount that they play because not only does it get more people exposed to the game, but especially in a location like Beijing, where hockey is certainly not a number one sport like it is here in Canada and the States as well, with competition with basketball and baseball. But nonetheless, they would get exposed to big stars like Crosby, Ovechkin, Bergeron, Patrick Kane, Jack Eichel, and that's why I believe NHL players should be in the Olympics.
Yeah, I think, there's multiple layers to why it's a good thing having NHL players in the Olympics. Your point, it's extremely important in terms of marketing. You want your best players. You want the best players on the planet being in the Olympics. It's a worldwide thing. Everyone's watching. So to have, Connor McDavid out there, he's yet to play for Team Canada in his career. Or in an Olympic level. But, having these guys, it can expand the game. And especially in a location like Beijing, it's not as big of a market. If the Olympics were in North America, fans are going to tune in regardless. However, in another place, they want very entertaining games. And like you said about the rosters, earlier or in 2018, they were very bare bones for the teams that typically rely on their NHL players. And, just in terms of the playing field, it wasn't very level. And, Russia having the KHL and having, some NHL caliber players on their team, it was a big advantage and they were able to win that. So I think another thing is just, in terms of Olympic integrity, you want to see every team being able to have the best chance and have their best players play for them and not, the second tier sort of players.
I really think that we could see a mix of, this is throwing it back to the World Cup of Hockey, but a mix of Team Canada and Team North America here. Because I think Doug Armstrong said that he wants to be as balanced as possible. He doesn't want to have too many veteran players or too many young guns. I think it would be a nice mix.
I think it will be a nice mix, and especially in this NHL, I don't remember a time where the NHL was this young in terms of their star talent. You look at McDavid, McKinnon, like Matthews. These are guys who are at the top of the league and, at such a young age, and they haven't been able to play on this worldwide stage yet. And I think it's big for the game, definitely.
Sorry.
Well, no, in terms of, I feel like, the veterans always kind of get the benefit of the doubt when picking Olympic rosters, more so over the young players. But I do think, if you have, those stable guys that you can rely on, and then you sprinkle in some McDavid and McKinnons, it's going to be very interesting Team Canada to watch.
One line combination that I think would be really good for the bottom six of Team Canada is the Bergeron, O'Reilly, and Stone possibility of a line combination. That would be just a complete shutdown line, a line you throw out, in the final 2 minutes of the game, gold medal game, semifinal, whatever. That would be a filthy line, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, exactly. If you're rolling out McKinnon playing, potentially with McDavid, you're going to have these lines that are designed just to go out there and create offensive chances. And you're going to want to have a line like the one you mentioned and put them against, the top line of the other team. If you were Team America and you have Matthews and Eichel on the same line going up against, O'Reilly, Bergeron, and Stone, it's going to make their jobs a lot harder. And I think strategically, maybe having all these players on the same line could benefit Team Canada.
Now, in other news, the NWHL had to postpone the rest of their season due to the COVID-19 virus. There were multiple outbreaks among their teams there in that small tournament that took place in Lake Placid. And actually, to be honest, it did really well. The games were broadcasted on Twitch. And, correct me if I'm wrong, but one game, I think, I don't know, but it may have been between the Toronto Six or, a team had 1.29 million viewers on Twitch, which is just amazing for the women's game. And I hope there is some sort of established league. And I think, had there been no virus, the NWHL would have done a successful job to host a women's league, an established women's league. However, the Rangers, and I just heard this past Saturday, the Leafs have both agreed to host a women's game, in some time. I know the Rangers game is being hosted on February 28th, and that will be a showcase between Minnesota and New Hampshire. And I'm all for growing the women's game. Like I mentioned with the Olympics point right there, I want the game to grow. I want to get more people in it. And I think this is an amazing step to do that.
Yeah, in terms of women's hockey, starting a league in general is difficult as is, and especially during a pandemic. But, just through the support of the hockey community, I think we have one of the greatest community in sports in terms of just, helping out whoever's there. And, like you said, upwards of 1 million viewers on Twitch on the one game. I think that's an incredible feat and, something to certainly build off of. Unfortunately, they did have to cancel their season, but I do think, seeing the support, like you said, from the Rangers, from these NHL, these big clubs, being able to, step aside and say, well, you can play at our rink. I think just in terms of growing the game, it's important and a step in the right direction for sure.
One player that we should highlight that has been phenomenal this week for your Montreal Canadiens is Tyler Toffoli. He has been absolutely torching the Vancouver Canucks, his former team. 8 of his 9 goals on the year came against Vancouver, and he is putting on a clinic. Whenever Montreal faces Vancouver, you can always expect Tyler Toffoli to come up and play a big game.
Yeah, Tyler Toffoli spent the most of his career in LA, and LA was in the same division as Vancouver, so he's used to playing Vancouver a couple times a year. And then obviously at the deadline last year, he went and was a part of that playoff team. So he knows the ins and outs of this team. He's practiced with them, he's played with them, and now on Montreal, he's been able to just, like you said, absolutely torch them. And, Tyler Toffoli, Montreal was bringing in all these people and they were signing a lot of guys. You didn't really know, is this money going to come back to bite them? But I do think the Tyler Toffoli investment has definitely paid off so far.
The discussion between who's on the hot seat between Travis Green, the head coach, and Jim Benning, the general manager. I believe that if the Canucks don't make the playoffs, GM Jim Benning will be fired because He said in an interview that he just ran out of time and that he would have to move money if to re-sign Tyler Toffoli.
Yeah, I think in terms of who's on the hot seat, I think I would give Travis Green, a little bit of a, longer leash than Jim Benning. He brought them. I don't think they beat the St. Louis Blues last year without Travis Green. I think his coaching leadership just, carried that team to another level last season. I think Jim Benning is exactly, the person who is on the hot seat. And I do believe if they miss the playoffs, and not so much miss the playoffs, but if they continue the season that they're having right now, he could be fired even before the season's over. I think, just in terms of someone who likes to look at, the managing part of the game a lot more, I think you can just look at Jim Benning as an example of terrible asset management. He had pieces, but last offseason was killer because he lost Jacob Markstrom, he lost Toffoli, he lost Chris Tanev. Exactly. He's losing these big pieces, big parts of the team. And a lot of that is because he's signing, these depth guys to contracts that they probably aren't worth. Jay Beagle making, $3 million, Antoine Roussel making a lot of money as well.
Erickson.
And, the infamous Louis Eriksson contract. I think, in terms of Jim Benning, he's just kind of throwing out the money when he had it. And then, it's coming back to bite him when he does need to re-sign these guys.
Not only is the defensive core bare bones, but it's also forcing a player like Jalen Chatfield, who had, I think, a promising future. He's being rushed into the lineup because, like you mentioned, Jim Benning just, moved out the money as quick as possible and, didn't really invest in his team long term.
Yeah, as an Oilers fan, I can definitely relate to, rushing development of players. And it's just so unfortunate to see, as you mentioned, Chatfield, maybe given a little more time to mature in the minors, he could come in and step up. However, now he's kind of just being thrown into the wolves and playing against the Leafs, especially. That's a very high power offensive team. And, he's struggling and that can do wonders, in terms of hurting a player's development.
One player that has been developing really well this season in 4 games, David Pastrnak, has 8 points, and he is on fire, man. I mean, what a return to the lineup. It's like he hasn't even missed a step.
Yeah, last season, David Pastrnak was, potential Hart candidate. I think he was the third candidate between him, Draisaitl, and Panarin. I'm not sure if it was him or McKinnon. But, nonetheless, 48 goals. He had a phenomenal season, and that potentially was playing injured the whole year. So, he took this extended off season. He got hip surgery, and now he's coming back looking, the best that we've seen him in his career. I watched the game against Philadelphia where he had a hat trick, scored a late goal, and scored the OT winner as well. He's just such a great player, and he can make an impact. His smarts and his shooting, especially surrounded by the players he is on Boston. I do think, David Pastrnak is a superstar in this league, and that is, solidified if it hadn't been already.
One question that I want answered by the Boston Bruins is how they create offense with their bottom 6. We see the perfection line, which is, Marchand, Bergeron, and Pastrnak. But right now, outside of that, Ritchie and Krejci lead the way with 9 points. And, after that, it's Craig Smith, and then it just gets thinner and thinner. So, personally, I don't know how they create offense from their bottom 6. And, like we've been mentioning for these 4 past weeks, that's very crucial to win games.
Yeah, I think Boston's an interesting case. I think they kind of get away with having a lack of depth because not only is their top line so special, but, they do focus on the back end and they do have a very strong defensive game. They're not needing to win these games, 5-4. They only need to score 2 or 3 goals to give themselves a real chance. So, if Marchand, Pastrnak, and Bergeron are doing their things, only one or 2 guys like Ritchie or Krejci needs to step up, depth-wise to give them a real shot. So I think, the Bruins are just kind of built well on the back end, and that kind of, gives them a little bit of space when they lack depth.
You mentioned that, you watched the Boston-Philly game and how Boston came back, I believe. Boston has completed 4 consecutive third-period comebacks, and I think you can really call them the comeback kids.
Yeah, no, exactly. 4 straight, and they've looked good in the third period of all of them. Maybe not so much it was their fault that they got down in those games. They were playing Philadelphia and Washington, some solid teams. However, I think that this team is also built to come back. You see when they're down goals, they're not really rolling out the bottom line or anything. Pastrnak, Bergeron, Marchand, Krejci, they're going to be seeing a lot of ice time in the third period, especially when they're down a couple goals.
One thing the NHL is looking to add, and this goes back to the postponement points, is a buffer period at the end of the season to make up for the postponed games, or if there is any canceled games. And I think this would be good for the NHL to add, because it kind of adds a layer of security, or at least a blanket layer, you could call it. So, at least there's some, I guess, pressure relieved when, talking about the uncertainty of finishing the 56-game proposed schedule. And, that's just why I think they should go ahead and add the buffer period.
Yeah, I think the buffer period is definitely something that they should add, and I think it would be really good. The NHL and then the NBA both last season for their playoffs, they kind of set out these real, tight schedules. This is going to happen on this date. The last day of the Stanley Cup Finals will be this day. The last day of the NBA Finals will be that day. And they were able to do that because they were in a bubble. They didn't really have the risk of having COVID come in and complicate things. However, in a season like this, when, teams are traveling, teams are going home, returning to their families, I think, it can't be as linear, this is going to happen on this day sort of thing. And I think a buffer period, just to give them kind of time to catch up, would definitely benefit the league.
We should definitely talk about Jason Spezza. He accomplished his first hat trick in 5 years against the Canucks, first hat trick since 2016, really turning back the clock. And, there are a lot of jokes made about Mike Babcock and how he would have a problem with that, how he benched Spezza against Ottawa.
Yeah, I don't think Spezza scoring a hat trick would ever happen on a Mike Babcock coach Leafs team. I'll say that. And I just remember I watched that game live, and I was cheering for Spezza. He's a player who used to be a top, the face of the Ottawa franchise. He was the captain before Erik Karlsson and after Daniel Alfredsson. He went to Dallas and had a couple successful years, but he was brought into this Leafs team on a veterans minimum. He's not expected to be a huge part of their offense, but for him to like you said, turn back the clock and score this hat trick, it was definitely something that all sports fans, especially hockey fans, could, get some joy and excitement out of.
I will always hold Jason Spezza, close to my heart, because I actually met him. He was playing for the Stars at the time, and it was in Buffalo. And my dad and I were checking out the hotel that's right down the street from the, I was about to call it the Harbor Center, but it's KeyBank Arena. And, my dad and I were checking out the hotel, and we hopped in the same elevator as Jason Spezza. So I had a nice, 30-second conversation with Jason Spezza. I'll always hold that moment close to my heart, and he'll definitely be, one of my, favorite players, because of that moment, but not really in a way, because he's not a standout player, but you know what I mean. But I might get a jersey of his, but definitely not a Leafs jersey of his. I might get a Stars one or a Sens one.
Yeah, I think as sports fans, you and I both can relate to this. Meeting an athlete or professional athletes, like meeting a celebrity to us.
Yeah, it is.
You meeting Spezza, he's obviously more of a well-established player. But even if you're meeting a third line, fourth line guy, it's still incredible just to see them in the flesh when they're on your screen all the time. And, these are just like these decorated athletes that have worked hard to get there. I think it's just a special experience no matter who you're meeting.
One, I guess another thing that we should add is I thought that during the series between the Senators and the Montreal Canadiens, that Ottawa was showing off their youth and speed during the series.
Yeah, I think, one part I looked at, with Montreal at the start of the season was that they had speed. I thought that it was a big part of their game. And, Ottawa trying to match that when they're playing against the Canadiens. And I think a lot of that, is to do with their youth. The game is getting faster by the day. And, some players, it's even forced them to retire, that they're not fast enough to keep up. But, with Stützle, he's looked incredible. Brady Tkachuk, maybe not the fastest, but, he'll give you that energy. And then guys like Josh Norris, Drake Batherson, these are young guys with very good legs and, good speed. And I think, once they start to complete their games a little bit more, this Ottawa team could be scary in the future, for sure.
Vancouver hasn't impressed me one bit, and they could be arguably as bad as Ottawa. Now, I know Montreal made Ottawa look like this superstar team and made, Matt Murray look like a Vezina Trophy winner, but I really think that, the basement of the North Division has been confirmed between Vancouver and Ottawa because, Vancouver hasn't impressed me when they play the top two teams like Montreal and Toronto.
Yeah, I think with Vancouver, and it's been this way for a couple of years, I think, their blue line is probably their biggest hole. And I think it's really being exposed. Last year they had Jacob Markstrom, maybe a dark horse kind of Vezina sort of guy. He had an incredible year, and he was just facing shots the whole game, a lot of high danger scoring chances as well, and just doing his best. And now, when you have Holtby, a guy who's very hit or miss in his performances, he obviously had that run in 2018 to bring the Capitals to the Cup, but he's had some shaky periods in his career. And, Thatcher Demko as well, a young goaltender. I think when this Canucks team is performing the same and they're not getting this elite goaltending that they were getting last year, it's just a recipe for disaster. And their offense hasn't been there as well, which is surprising to many.
We finally have 2021 NHL draft news, and the league is looking at pushing back the draft simply because there isn't enough coverage for teams and scouts to do proper research. And I think this does benefit both the player side and the scout side, because looking from a player's point of view, you obviously want to get noticed. You want your hard work to get noticed. And then looking at it from the scout's point of view, if you're making a pick within, it could be any pick, because really this 2021 NHL draft is so random because of this whole pandemic. If you're a scout, you really have no idea who you're taking number one. The rumor is Owen Power, but it really could be anyone. And I think this does benefit both sides because it allows scouts to get a proper, more, certified look at these prospects.
Yeah, I think, in terms of all parties affected by this, I think pushing back the draft will definitely help, everyone involved. You look at players, and for them, obviously the more well-established first-round guys, they're not too worried. However, these late-round guys who were relying on, their last season before being draft eligible to, kind of prove themselves and prove why they deserve to be picked, they're not being given this opportunity. And for them, I'm sure it's frustrating. I remember back in 2017, he was a first round pick, but Nico Hischier didn't start on any draft boards at the start of the season. And through his, year in the QMJHL, he worked his way up to being that number one pick. And, we're not going to really see that this year. And then as well for the management, like the scout side, a good draft pick can really help your franchise and take you out of the ground. And, some of these teams that are at the bottom of the league are going to be needing these actual prospects. And, with the scouts, some scouts could even lose their job this year because they just make a bad call on a guy that they don't really have too much intel on.
Washington has now 3 consecutive regulation losses. And, luckily, the two teams that have had their games postponed are the New Jersey and Devils and Buffalo Sabres. They're lucky that, they're not playing, or else they would actually probably be in some trouble.
Yeah, I think, with Washington, you look at 3 consecutive losses for any team, especially the Capitals, you wouldn't really expect 3 straight losses from like a top tier team. However, whenever I look at a situation like this, it's not so much, the Capitals are bad. It's, are they really bad? How can they rebound from this? And like I said, they've been playing good teams. They've been playing Philadelphia, Boston. So these 3 regulation losses, could maybe come back to bite them late in the season. But as of now, I think, also like you said with the postponements, they're a little ahead in the standings. They have a little bit of a buffer.
We got to talk about the whole Columbus offside and the penalty fiasco that happened yesterday afternoon against the Carolina Hurricanes. And, so what happened was Carolina scores, Columbus challenges for offside. The call on the ice stands as confirmed, which was a goal, and Columbus is charged with a penalty. It doesn't look too bad from that angle. That's part one. Part two is the intermission and where all this derails. Columbus comes out of the locker room in the third period, down 1, I should mention, without the power play. So the play returned to 5-on-5. And, there's just, I guess, so much inconsistency because I don't know what angles the ref used, but if you look from the Columbus bench angle, it was clearly offside. Nino Niederreiter was, or I don't know if it was Nino Niederreiter or whoever, but that Carolina player at the top of your screen from the Columbus POV was definitely offside. And there has to be something done by the NHL, because not only does this, Nick Foligno said this, but this looks bad on the NHL and this looks very bad on the linesmen. And obviously, as a league, you don't want any bad looks.
Yeah, for someone like you and myself who's played minor hockey our whole life, a call's a call. There's really not much debate. There's no instant replay. But this is the NHL. They have camera angles from all over. They should be able to make the right call, 9 times out of 10. Obviously, there's going to be the occasional bad call. That's just sports. But, especially with something like this where there's a clear line and, you can really judge where a player, precisely is. I do think it is unfortunate that they got this call wrong. And, maybe you think, in terms of player tracking and stuff like that, they could, implement that more in towards like getting the right call in terms of where players actually are. Because it seems like there's too many unwritten rules that the refs base their calls off of. And it does cause for some controversy for sure.
It's almost like a gray area in a way, like with the whole offside review. And, it sucks because the offside review was put in because of the whole Matt Duchene call and how that was onside and, Duchene scored. But, like we saw yesterday, Carolina played a really good cycle game before that call got reversed, I guess.
Yeah, no, I do think Carolina came to play, and being late in the second period, obviously in hindsight you can see how that totally did affect the game. However, Carolina did come to play, and it's unfortunate for Columbus. And since they were the ones who ended up losing, they're just going to keep pointing at that incident.
Now it's time for us to present the weekly Pagcast power rankings for the North Division by Zach Hogan. So once again, he has the Montreal Canadiens at number 1, Maple Leafs at 2, the Jets at 3, Flames at 4, Oilers at 5, Canucks at 6, and Senators at 7. Personally, I believe the Canadiens should drop down to 2, maybe even 3, because they did not impress me at all this past week. They were playing an Ottawa team that was very desperate for a win, very young, using their speed to their advantage. And to be honest, Montreal got dominated. They only won, the one game on Saturday by 1 goal. Like, these games weren't blowouts, and they also lost in regulation. So I believe Montreal should be either 2 or 3. Toronto should definitely be 1. And Senators should be bumped up to 6, maybe, and Canucks down at 7, because the Canucks are on a 4-game losing streak right now. So, the rest of his power rankings are fine.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that we're 4 weeks in, and it's still sort of these 3 sort of tiers between Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, and then the bottom tier being Vancouver, Ottawa. I don't really disagree with his rankings too much. Like you said, you have a little more insight than I do on this Canadiens team. I think just Hogan as a Leafs fan, doesn't want to bite off too much, saying that they're the number 1 team, and then they lose to Montreal this week or whatnot. So maybe it's a bit of him being afraid to put the Leafs in that number 1 spot. But I do think it is between them and the Canadiens. But, again, you're saying maybe put Vancouver at 7, and I think, there's an argument for that. And the Leafs, sure, they were playing well, but they were playing against Vancouver, so how much is that really to, describe how they've been playing? As for the Oilers, we had an unfortunate Battle of Alberta loss on Saturday. Could have been closer than it was, but, I think that us being in the 5th spot, we need to start showing consistency against better teams. We do well against Ottawa. We've done fairly well against the Leafs, but I think, we just need to be doing better against, the rest of the North Division before we move up into that top 4.
It's time for Tuesday's picks. So on Tuesday we have a good number of games in my opinion. Currently there are only 2 postponed games, but I remember the last time that I said there was a good amount of games, and currently, and as we saw last week, there were a bunch of postponements. So hopefully I don't jinx anything. But Flyers and Capitals, I got to go with the Capitals. I think they'll break that 3-game losing streak. Red Wings and Panthers, I'm going with the Panthers. Oilers and Senators, I'm going to go with the Oilers. Lightning and Predators, I'm going to go with the Predators. Blackhawks and Stars, I'm going to go with the Blackhawks. Ducks and Golden Knights, got to go with the Golden Knights. Sharks and Kings, I'm going to go with LA Kings. And Jets and Flames, I'm going to go with the Calgary Flames.
I'll bring my record from last week. I went 6-2, which is not too bad. My best week so far. We have 8 games again, so I'm hoping to do better than 6-2. I'll go with you on the Capitals. I do think, they lost 7-4, and those games are kind of hard to analyze just because there's so much scoring. But I do think with a coach like Laviolette, he's going to tighten up that defensive side a lot more, and I don't think the Flyers will be scoring 7 goals. I'll go with the Oilers over the Senators. Just, Oilers offense has been rolling. They scored 4 goals and still lost to the Flames, so the offense has still been there. I'll go with the Stars over the Blackhawks. I'm not sure who's starting between Ottinger and Khudobin. Khudobin got in a little bit of trouble. Apparently, he broke some rule.
He was late to practice.
Yeah, something like that. And Ottinger, we talked about him early in the season as a rookie. He's actually been pretty good for them so far, which is nice to see. I'll go with the Panthers over the Red Wings. Red Wings just an unfortunate team so far. I'll go with the Lightning over the Predators. I just think, the Lightning, it's hard to bet against them on any given game. I'll go with the Kings as well over the Sharks. I just think, the Kings, they're very hit or miss. I've watched a couple of their games, and sometimes they've looked completely lost on offense, and sometimes, things have been rolling and they've been doing well. I'll take the Golden Knights over the Ducks. Golden Knights have been one of the top teams. I think the thing with the Golden Knights is interesting. They're always a good team throughout the season, but they don't get talked about enough until like late in the season when they're actually like a cup contender. But I think the Golden Knights is still a very great, complete team. And then I'll take the Flames over the Jets as well. Taking my Alberta native, the Flames, it's hard to do over the Jets, but I just do think that they're going to start to get on a roll, especially after that Battle of Alberta win.
And I got to mention, like, that Battle of Alberta, I'm really looking forward to, seeing that 10 times. I think that we could see some really good fights.
Yeah, no, exactly. You look at old school hockey, and I think the current game has lost a bit of that. But being an Oilers fan, that Battle of Alberta, that's a game every year I'm going to tune into, give my full attention, and I'm excited to see it 10 times. Obviously, the first one wasn't the result we wanted, but, it still was a very highly entertaining game, 10 goals in total, and, a couple of questionable hits back and forth, a little bit of chippiness. I think, that's just the breaking the ice, and I think the Oilers and Flames are going to have a great series this year.
I believe that as well. And, we did see, I think, in my opinion, something that the Oilers kind of struggle with was kind of their defensive play and how Calgary kind of exposed that.
Yeah, as an Oilers fan, it's unfortunate. We did not, bring our best defensive game to the table. And early in the season, it's not the worst thing, but it is something that we have to work on. It's just something that hasn't been there this season. A big part of that, Koskinen's been playing just pretty much every single game except for one, and now we have Mike Smith back. I'm not saying Smith is, anything.
It would be a huge break for Koskinen.
Exactly. Rather than Koskinen starting every single game, we could see more of a 60-40 kind of split, and I think that's just going to benefit the Oilers and, the fatigue that their goalies have.
Well, I should mention my record. I went 5-3 last week, so I've been basically above 500 ever since week 1. So I'll take that very much.
Yeah, every night there's a couple of games like Flyers Capitals that could go either way, but
oh yeah,
you look at the Red Wings game, and I feel like that's an easy pick for the both of us. You're just gonna pick against the Red Wings anytime they're playing. It's just been unfortunate for Detroit this season.
Well, I'd like to thank Nolan Thode for, again, another awesome episode of Down to the Wire.
Well, thank you for having me.